Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Bolton, and I appreciate the warm welcome because it was 3 degrees C at my lake cottage when I presented this, when I created this presentation, and it was 31 C when I landed. So thank you for that. We have 2 parts to the presentation today. The first is a brief description of the world news. As you guys know, I'm a newsreader and a podcaster, and what Matthew asked me to do is just quickly run over some of the key headlines, and then I'll move quickly to a presentation about some solutions that our Special Secretary spoke about a little earlier today. The tea landscape has shifted, and as you can see, it's hostile. It's not conducive to the kind of global environment that we enjoyed before. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but they start with the election of President Trump in the United States and the change in focus from a global, collegial trade environment, which has been deteriorating for some time, to an openly hostile environment in which individual countries are selected to be punished and, in some cases, significant damage to their environment. Both sides right now are signaling optimism in the instance of India, which is facing a 50% tariff, which will impact the tea industry very seriously. If you see what happened in Brazil, which also faces a 50% tariff, you'll see that coffee prices have now spiked to more than $4. You're going to see significant increase in the retail value of coffee, approximately 2 cents for every 10 cents of coffee at the commodity level. And we're also going to see some significant changes in the shift of coffee and tea. Buyers, frankly, are not interested in paying 1.5 times what they were before. In Canada and Mexico, we are concerned with a type of uncertainty. As all of you in business know, certainty is rock solid important to projections, to investments, and there's just a continuous, nonstop vacillation in rules and regulations. We're going to see the beginning of negotiations for the USMCA treaties. Those are very important for the tea industry. India is also involved in that because, as you guys know, it's a major producer of tea and a big supplier, about 11% to the United States. So we've already seen a very steep decline in Chinese tea. Ironically, it was a peak, and we're actually ahead for the year. But subsequent to that, in May, we saw a 35%, 40% decline in the amount of tea coming into the United States, which is principally a green tea. Now, that's what's going to happen to India. You're going to see, starting just a week or two ago, a big decline. There was a front loading. India's ahead right now for the year, but the front loading is not sufficient to offset what will be a 30 to 40% decline in overall exports to the United States in 2025. If you look at the United States, you see that Japan, India is now number 2 as of last year. These are countries surprisingly hit with high tariffs. Japan's got a 20% tariff. Argentina has a 10% tariff. Sri Lanka has 30% tariffs. The European countries typically are 20. So these have all impacted the flow of tea significantly, the most visible of which has been China, as I mentioned, because they were hit first. And the other thing about China is they were hit hard. At one time, tariffs to bring tea aboard were 152.5%, which meant that ships actually turned around because had they landed, it would have been a financial disaster for the buyers and sellers both. There's a couple of things about the economy that show that tariffs are not working. Unemployment's rising. We've seen significant increases in volatility. There may be an outstanding stock market, but the exodus of large numbers of workers through the immigration enforcement, and also the changes associated with taxation. The tariffs are frequently misunderstood. They're a tax, and they're paid by the people who consume the product. And in the past, much of that was absorbed by the different businesses, the Walmarts and such, hoped that it would go away. They now clearly understand it's not going away. And even though there's court action which is going to challenge and has in fact declared the tariffs illegal, the administration is going to pursue other routes, and ultimately they're going to increase the amount of tariffs. Tariffs at the beginning of the year were 2.2% on average into the United States. They're about 17% now. And they're going to top out at somewhere around 20 or 25%, pretty much regardless of what happens in the courts, because the tariffs will shift from one authorization to a separate. If you look at tea imports, they're about 282 million, which is not insignificant. The United States is usually one of the top three, if not the top importer of tea in the world. They're predominantly a black tea market, as you know, and they drink their tea cold, which means aroma is not as highly valued as clarity, for example. And those markets, Argentina, for example, at 10%, and to a certain extent Kenya, have benefited because as buyers shift away from more expensive tariff sources, you're going to see a greater amount of volume from countries that have managed to slip through the net. Malawi seems to be an exception. Normally it's a high number. It's low right now, but that has more to do with production. India, good, strong production, but I think there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen next. And you know, the bottom line in the United States is if you're a retail buyer, you were buying Indian tea for about $4 a kilo. And then you wake up one day on August 29th and the tea's now $6 a kilo. But the thing that's deceptive about that is that that's $6 coming into the wholesaler. And the wholesaler, or in the event of a value-added buyer, is now getting tariffed not on $4 a kilo, but perhaps getting a tariff of 50% on as much as $20 or $30 per kilo. So what was in the budget for $4 a kilo is at least going to 6, more likely to 8, and sometimes as high as 15 or 20. So that leads to cancellation and just an overall frustration on the part of the industry. And here's the catch. All of this is so that manufacturing will increase, and for 6 months manufacturing is decreased. And that's going to continue. So this is all supposed to be magic. It's all supposed to create many more jobs in the United States. It's supposed to create greater affluence. It's supposed to onshore lots of businesses. It's not working. And I think that it has set a precedent which is important for us to study, which is that anti-globalism, this idea of the creation of trade blocs, is now well on its way. And in the presentation, I'll identify specific blocs. But there's also hope. I was very pleased to see this secretary talk about how there's a way to think about how we cooperate that is more the way of tea. And what we'll chat about here is coalitions of the willing. This is a concept where groups of people who share a common interest, who are associated with production and with consumption, make deals. These can be trade deals at national level. The concept is what they call plurilateral as opposed to multilateral or bilateral. And plurilateral has some amazing benefits. So let's move into those real quick. That's my presentation on the news, which is gloom and doom. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about a concept that I think is really interesting. There's a book out called Anti-Fragile Companies. And what they mean is these companies can thrive in an environment which is chaotic, And they do so in a very orderly, ironically, in a very orderly and a thoughtful way. So tea is resilient and resourceful, and tea has competencies that lend themselves to plurilateralism, and tea has this extraordinary presence in the world in terms of community building and communication. So these are the panels, these are the blocks that are forming. But I want you to closely look at this next crazy slide. It's in 3 dimensions, and it's called a hyperbolic projection. And why it's so helpful to us right now is that when you look at a gravity map, what you tend to see is proximity in terms of which countries are nearby. For example, the United States and Canada are big trading partners because they've got an undefended border that goes on for thousands of miles. When you look at the world this way, you also see the trade blocks, but you see down here in Germany and Russia a cluster. And it turns out the cluster might involve countries that are quite distant, or the cluster might involve cultures that are radically different, or the cluster might involve sectors. For example, Germany is great for heavy machinery, and many countries trade with Germany all over the world, Swiss, for reasons that don't have anything to do with proximity. Tea can be clustered. And as soon as we begin to think about it in terms of clusters, we begin to liken ourselves to a globalism without the World Trade Organization kind of, bulk, without the 17-year negotiations that it took for Mercosur. We're not going to see the same resistance, because if you build a coalition with the Ethical Tea Partnership, the IGG, the Taiwan Milk Tea Alliance, the Japan Green Tea Association, what you've got is common ground and a resistance to having a buyer pick on any one of those countries. You also have a great opportunity. Those countries which share a common love for green tea or for matcha or a love for oolong or a love for black tea also have lots of production skills that they can trade, lots of best practices they can share, and ultimately they can enforce this idea of improving the quality of the product, of raising what we define as premium tea to a level where it'll be recognized widely. So just as an experiment, I created a hyperbolic plane showing the various countries that are involved in the production and the manufacture of oolong. It's about a 95 million kilo, 400 million, 3-4% growing category. It's not isolated, so you can't see it as an HS902, 0902, but you can see from sophisticated studies that it's a fast-growing, lucrative market, that it provides premium. This is the matcha trade bloc. This is the green trade bloc. This is the black tea trade bloc. Significantly bigger, much more complicated. And here's my thought. If you study the mission for most of these associations, you see that they're already quite interested in amplifying a collective voice in trade negotiations, standardizing and defending quality, sharing market intelligence, and coordinating tea-focused trade blocs. It isn't about replacing national associations, it's about connecting them with a common purpose, and one that benefits both the origins and the industry as a whole.